Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. The three most dangerous phrases in the Army. A private who says, "I learned this in basic." A lieutenant who says, "In my experience." A chief that says, "Now watch this crap." I don't know if warrant officers existed in World War II, but OP's Gramps sounds like that kind of soldier. You're not sharpening those drill bits correctly, Sergeant. I feel like World War II's chock full of military stories is one of those bottomless veins of gold where you discover more the more you dig. This story comes to us from my grandfather, from whom I inherit my love of pranks, most of my sense of humor, and probably my deep appreciation for schadenfreude. Like many of his stories, I heard this one as a kid many times, usually in front of a fire with snow falling outside, and always accompanied by an eye roll and a tart comment or two from my long-suffering grandmother. Gramps was a master machinist going into war, and he had quite a bit more experience than most people with engines and engineering. He was one of those guys who would just look at about anything mechanical with both reverence and a critical eye for making it better, and his knack for success inspired the Army Air Corps to snatch him up and plop him back down in the Midwest as a crew chief. My understanding, and I don't have any military experience here, but this is what I've been told, is that the senior NCO in charge of the maintenance, repair, upkeep, and general functioning of a squadron is the guy that actually owned those planes. From what Gramps always said, his attitude was that he loaned the pilots his planes, and they were expected to bring them back in roughly the same condition as they were when they went up. When they were on the ground, the aircraft and everything used to maintain them was part of his kingdom. One fine day, a very new, fresh out-of-the-box lieutenant, still with that new officer smell, introduced himself to Gramps and the other guys in the unit. As they were sitting in back of one of the maintenance bays, sharpening up a big double set of drill bits that had been getting more use than usual, and by introduced, I mean came in shouting about how they were doing it all wrong, he knew all about what they were doing, of course, and so just knew that the drill bit sharpening they were doing was actually going to ruin the bits and waste war resources. And did they want the Krauts to win? He showed them all the right way to do it and wasn't going to take any lip. My grandfather was not the sort of guy that was able to keep his mouth shut, which is probably another reason they put him in charge of mechanical things that tended not to get uppity with them. I also inherited this congenital condition, but that's a separate tragedy entirely. He protested that the lieutenant's direction actually was incorrect, and he got about two-thirds of the way into what he was about to say before the officer decided that he'd had enough backtalk and gave him weekend night shift guard duty. Gramps eyeballed him a bit and would always say at this point in the story that he felt compelled to obey the lieutenant because he was just so shiny. So he smiled and said, "Yes, sir," shut his mouth, and that was that. This was well before the Army had put tons of resources into things that weren't war critical. The airbase Gramps was stationed at was essentially a dirt/grass airfield with hangars plopped down and utterly without any pretense at pavement anywhere in sight. Consequently, the main traffic artery right behind the hangars, and which one had to go down when entering or leaving the base at all, was parallel to the airstrip and was the sort of thick, gooey, sticky, oobleck mud that one gets in Nebraska when it's been raining a lot and people have been driving Army Jeeps over the same patch of ground repeatedly. About halfway down in the middle of where the traffic had been heaviest, there's what Gramps described as a puddle, and which he later clarified was nearly 300 feet long, 30 feet wide, totally unavoidable, and which would swallow up the unwary interloper who didn't keep going, go too fast or too slow, and you're effed one way or the other. Go through slowly and don't stop and you'd probably be okay. Gramps positioned himself on Saturday night with his rifle and grimly determined to protect this Nebraska airbase in the middle of effing nowhere from the Huns. Waited about two-thirds of the way down this Sherry-Bittis-like vortex and waited. Lieutenant Shiny, along with a lot of other guys on the base, really liked taking his weekend pass in town because there were girls there, which any self-respecting soldier knew was an opportunity one did not lightly pass up, and which was the reason that Gramps had been assigned weekend sentry duty as just an extra little FU. Pretty soon, Lieutenant Shiny came trundling back to the base, and not in an Army Jeep. Oh no, his family evidently had money or pull or something, because he had an actual nice car to get around in, and those big swoopy fenders and the floorboards just outside the doors on both sides. He was playing it safe, Gramps said, by not driving down the middle of the road masquerading as a muddy pond. He was going along the side where it wasn't quite as deep and he was less likely to get stuck. But that also meant that the driver's side of the car was almost overhanging the deepest part of the mud. You can probably see where this is going. The duty of a sentry, of course, is to stop anyone they don't recognize from being on the base or near anything vital, and while Gramps knew perfectly well that Lieutenant Shiny was where he was supposed to be, he also knew that there was no way in hell during wartime he was going to get questioned about it, so he advanced just as Lieutenant Shiny got abreast of a particularly bad spot and hollered, "Halt!" in his best drill instructor voice. It got the message across and the car stopped immediately. Danger, Will Robinson. Window rolls down, top of Lieutenant Shiny's head pokes out, and he yells back, "Lieutenant Shiny, sentry, returning from off-base pass." Gramps yelled back from about 30 feet away, "Advance and be recognized," meaning, of course, I can't see you clearly where you are. Come to where I can see you, or else. Frustrated, Lieutenant Shiny opened the door, dangerously close to the surface of the awaiting mud, and leaned out so the light caught him. He was in uniform, of course, all dudded up, as Grandpa said, and wearing decidedly non-regulation boots with his uniform that came up to his knees and were polished to the sort of shiny finish that NASA uses on telescope mirrors today. He yelled back again who he was and was obviously frustrated and hoping he hadn't just got stuck, but he also hadn't gotten any closer as he'd been commanded to by the very armed sentry that had just challenged him, and on some level he knew it. Next steps, racking around into the chamber as a warning and a repeated command, "Advance and be recognized." Desperate, but knowing there was no way out of this other than forward, Lieutenant Shiny stood on the floorboards of the car, now just level with the surface and starting to inch closer to it slowly, and declared himself again, and was greeted with a loaded weapon pointed at him and a repeated command to advance and be recognized. I asked Gramps once what would have happened if he'd actually shot Lieutenant Shiny, and he always said he was pretty sure he'd have been court-martialed at the least, but gee did if he wasn't determined to make a point about this, and so Lieutenant Shiny finally stepped off the sideboards of his car, sank immediately to his knees with muddy goo slopping over the top of his boots, and sadly advanced. Gramps let him get 2 steps forward before shouldering his weapon again and snapping him the smartest of salutes. "Sir, thank you. You may proceed." Lieutenant Shiny sadly got back into his car and valiantly tried to get it moving again, to no avail. Mud was everywhere, inside and out, mud flying everywhere as his wheels spun, and eventually he gave up and trudged off to his barracks. By morning, they ended up having to use 2 jeeps and to come along to yank that car out of the mud. Gramps said that he got talked to briefly by someone above Lieutenant Shiny and basically told, "Don't do that again," but he said nothing much further came of it. Oddly enough, the subject of sharpening drill bits never came up again, and Lieutenant Shiny was always very careful about staying out of the maintenance bay unless he was going to be taking an aircraft up. And our next story. Returns only in original packaging? All right then. So I go into the local big chain hardware store just to do the usual wander around that guys like to do when I see that they have a great sale on a miter saw/stand combination. Since this is something I've had my eyes on for a while, I make the purchase and happily head home to set it up. I get home, haul the boxes out of the car, take everything out of the boxes, crunch up the boxes and put them in the recycling bin, put all the packing materials in the trash, and start the assembly. The saw just took a couple steps, everything was great, so I moved to the stand. Get it all together, and then go to put the saw on the stand and notice that one of the attachment clamps is broken. So I get in the car and head back to the store to see if they can replace it. No, I'm told, I'll need to return the entire purchase in the original packaging for replacement. Wouldn't it be easier, I asked, to simply go into one of these boxes here and swap out the clamp rather than make me go home, disassemble everything, try to recreate the packaging and haul everything back in? Of course not. That would make too much sense. I ask exactly what their return policy is, and I'm told 30 days with a receipt in original packaging. So I do what any self-respecting guy would do. I buy another saw/stand combination. Right on the other side of the checkout in the full view of management, I open the box, reach in, grab a functional clamp, replace it with the broken one, making sure to put it back into the original little plastic bag that it came in, and head over to customer service to make a return. And our next story. Sued my neighbor after she sprayed weedicide on my lawn. Caught my neighbor spraying weedicide on my lawn in my fenced-in backyard because she said she was sick of all the weeds and thought she was doing me a solid. I like dandelions. They're good for the bees. I have pet rabbits, dogs, cats, and a tortoise. I like to roam the yard, and all of them eat or at least nibble and lick the grass, so it's literally poisoning my pets. So anyway, I kick her the F out and take all my pets inside. Now, 2 of my rabbits are dead and another is in critical condition. I'll never be able to let my pets outside again to eat the grass because weedicide takes forever to go away because it can sit in the soil for who knows how long, and I'm worried that the dogs and cats might end up having a reaction too since they also nibble the grass. Call me overprotective or overcautious, I don't care. I love my animals. So I'm suing her for damage to my property because it's now unusable for my animals, veterinary bills, and emotional damage due to the deaths of my 2 rabbits. I'm also trying to get the cops to pursue a case of animal abuse or, at minimum, criminal damage because she did basically poison my animals, but I doubt anything will come from it because I have to prove ill intent, but they're pursuing her for criminal trespass. She's a Karen. I think she deserves it for thinking she had any right to be on my property at all, and especially because it's killed my pets and now I don't know what to do about my lawn because I'm not risking another animal's life by letting them out. At least unsupervised for at least a year. However, my parents and my girlfriend think I'm being unnecessarily cruel because it was an accident and she thought she was just being a good neighbor and that I'm making it to be a bigger deal than it is and should just ask for her to pay my vet bills. Edit. Info. She's asked me about the weeds before. I don't remember it verbatim, but basically the conversation was along the lines of her, "Hey, I see you have a lot of dandelions and weeds. Have you noticed that too?" Me, "Yup, I enjoy the look of a natural lawn." Her, "Something about my new car." The end. Since she has a kid, she always asks if he can come over and play with my rabbits. I assume she knew they ate them. If she was looking over my fence that often, she'd notice the dandelions were only ever flowering in 1/4 of the lawn at a time because my rabbits got cycled in a way that most of the lawn was mostly weed-free, while the part they couldn't get to that week would be sprouting. Edit again. I've talked to her, told her that my rabbits died after the fact, and there was staining on their pen. She said it's weedicide, not pesticide. They were probably just sick. Last edit. My rabbits were actually outside when she did this, and there was a stain on their pen. I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure they got a direct spray. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.